Whether it be movies, TV shows, music, or games, there's constantly a push for the newest thing. Companies have started targeting nostalgia as well for profits over preservation. Even though retro movies are often praised as classics, retro games are sometimes viewed as just obsolete technology, with all of these ideas leading to different groups missing out on a lot of amazing old games, one of which is the original Metal Gear. Now, many don't even know that there were Metal Gear games before Metal Gear Solid, and if they do know, they think that they're kind of irrelevant. I already covered some of the development history of Metal Gear Solid and how Metal Gear 1 paved the way for its existence, so if you are interested in that, I will link to that in the description and at the end of this video. But before we hop into it, if you do enjoy today's review, please consider leaving a like and subscribing and checking out our other videos. The algorithm does not like variety channels at all anymore, so your support does mean a lot to me. Metal Gear came out all the way back in 1987 on the MSX2. A lot of American or European viewers might be more familiar with the NES version of this game, but that's something that we'll probably take a look at in a different video. Even the original game's creator, Hideo Kojima, wasn't actually a fan of that version, which took a lot of liberties with the gameplay and story elements of the original game. The MSX2 version of this game is considered the superior version, which is a bit ironic since a lot of modern gamers now don't even have any idea what an MSX2 even was. In Metal Gear, you're tasked with infiltrating a secret military facility, Outer Heaven, in order to destroy a nuclear weapon known as Metal Gear. These mech-like weapons are a staple of the franchise going forward, but they're basically walking super tanks with very advanced weaponry and armor and access to nuclear weapons. They get more insane over the course of the series, but even the one in the original Metal Gear was considered a worldwide threat. You do play as Solid Snake, basically the mascot of this franchise, who is a member of the elite military unit Foxhound, who answers directly to his commanding officer, Big Boss. Solid Snake and Big Boss would obviously go on to star in multiple other games over the years, and they're known most for their appearances in the Metal Gear Solid games taking place after the first two games, but it's fun to play through the title where they actually both made their debut. Now, Metal Gear is a bit limited with what it can do, and it's very clear that this was a pioneering title in the stealth game genre. There's a misconception that floats around in gaming history that Metal Gear somehow created the stealth genre of game, which it did not, but this game does deserve a lot of credit for helping to further popularize and innovate inside the stealth genre, and it did definitely expand what stealth games were doing at the time and some of the scope going forward on technical limitations and what could be done with the machine you were working on. This game is surprisingly deep for the limited capabilities of what the MSX2 could do in 1987. Later games in the franchise would include mechanics like hugging walls, leaning around corners, going prone and crawling under obstacles to hide, a wide array of gadgets and more, while Metal Gear 1 only has access to some of these things. While Snake can't go prone or hug walls, he is able to get close enough to them to use them as obstacles that obscure enemy lines of sight. Lines of sight were actually incredibly hard to do at the time, so it's really impressive how they were able to actually make this work in that era. But Snake does also have access to some of the gadgets that later games use, such as seeker missiles, with the caveat being that it is extremely easy to miss a lot of the weapons and items that are in this game. It's very easy to pass by them and actually never acquire them in a playthrough. I would make the argument that the same can be said for later titles, but I found this one particularly difficult to locate some of the weapons in. Metal Gear has very limited gunplay, which is actually one reason this game was originally created. I got into the backstory much more in my previous video on this topic, but a very brief TLDR is essentially that Metal Gear was created out of technical limitations of the MSX2. It actually was originally supposed to be a shooter, but it became a stealth game instead because of what they could do at the time. Usually technical limitations lead to worse games, but in this case, they're the whole reason that the Metal Gear franchise ever became what it did. Now, while some of the limitations that caused Metal Gear to be a stealth game do shine through in gameplay, such as a very clear limit on how many bullets can appear on screen at a time, I don't really think these limits detract from the experience. Playing through this game, I actually felt like the game had a lot of similarities to something like Pac-Man. I don't really mean in terms of gameplay, but in terms of timelessness. Normal people don't really look at Pac-Man even now and get upset by the limited graphics or the mostly simple gameplay. Those things actually add to the timeless aspect of what Pac-Man is, and they make the game very accessible to new and old players alike. Metal Gear shares that same charming quality, but in a different way, and speaking of Pac-Man, I thought it was interesting that researching more for this review, I found that Pac-Man actually came up as an influence from Metal Gear, as Hideo Kojima wanted the gameplay of Metal Gear to go from a sneaking game to almost a puzzle-like experience when you're trying to get away from enemies once detected, similar to how Pac-Man is sort of a chase game where you're making decisions on where to go. Like any game, I'm sure there are people out there who are absolutely incredible at the first Metal Gear. You know, for almost any game you can imagine, there's somebody who's played the game 200 different times, they have the best strats of all time, they've speed ran the game and they have a world record or something, but for me, you know, just a normal player playing this game for the first time, I actually had some problems with the game. I found parts of it very difficult, not because it was that the game was difficult in terms of combat or stealth, though it is easy to make mistakes when sneaking through Outer Heaven actually and get yourself in trouble, but the difficulty I had was figuring out where items were, especially on a first playthrough. I know some people are going to think, okay, well, you know, having to look around, that's not really a problem, but it was kind of beyond that. There's not a very natural progression in this game when it comes to exploration, finding items, or even knowing where to go at all. I wouldn't say it's impossible or that there's no way to complete the game on your own, but there are some things that come off a little silly in modern day, like for example the character of Schneider. Big Boss tells you to call him on the radio in order to get more information on different things in the game, but there's never actually any radio frequency given to you, or any clues in the game written down or contextual anywhere on how to do this. Originally, I thought this would be a situation similar to Metal Gear Solid 1, where you actually had to check the physical manual of the game to find a radio frequency, and I guess in modern day that would just mean Google searching it, because most people probably don't have the physical copy of some of these old games anymore, but that wasn't even the case here. You're actually expected to just guess until you find the right frequency. Also, because many of these radio calls are way too based around what room you're actually in when you initiate the dialogue, if you were to leave the room you're supposed to call someone in and call in the next room, most of the time you'll just receive no answer. There actually are problems with glitching as well that I've read, where sometimes you can be in the exact right spot to call someone you need to call, and it just doesn't work. Luckily, you can pretty much always progress without this, but it makes it really hard to figure out how to do so. Now, this is probably the biggest fault I personally had with Metal Gear from a modern standpoint, is that, like I said, there's very few contextual clues or narrative elements in the game that actually help you figure out where to go or what to do next. And I'm a big fan of freedom in video games. There's definitely places for linear narratives, but games like Elden Ring, or even Skyrim, despite all its quest markers, that just let you kind of loose on the world and say, hey, go where you want and get started, have a good time. I think those kinds of things are really fun, but they do still have progression clues and communities around them that help you get the lay of the land. Even when you look at later games that are more contained, similar to Metal Gear's style, like a stealth game in the vein of Splinter Cell or even Hitman, you are given a lot of freedom in how you tackle different situations, but the world is actually designed in different ways where it's easier to figure out how to progress through it. I will give Metal Gear a lot of credit for when it came out. There were not a ton of games like this at the time, and from that standpoint, it's actually incredibly impressive. But this is also from an era of games that were actually kind of designed as almost a wandering simulator time sink. Basically, they wanted you to kind of take your time, try everything trial and error style, where you'd wander around forever just trying to figure out what to do next. And I don't really consider that high critical thinking gameplay, because there's no real thinking involved in just testing everything on everything else. You know, there's not really a ton of critical thinking or skill involved in walking from door to door just testing out key cards hoping they work, or just wandering around clicking random radio frequencies to try and get someone to actually talk to you in a given room. Those things are kind of just guesswork. At the same time, like I said, I do love freedom when it comes to gaming, and I do enjoy how complex some elements of this game are for just how simple it was and when it came out. The fact that this game is so impressive looking for when it launched is mind-boggling to me, because you look at NES games, which were coming out at around the same time actually, even the NES version of this game that came out after it, you look at those games and they look way worse than this. This game was very, very pretty for the time, because the MSX2 did have flaws with how it ran, but it also was a really cool and amazing canvas for developers that knew how to use it to make games. I mentioned the door locking systems, and despite some criticisms I may have of them, they're very complex for this era. You have to actually find specific key cards that correspond to different doors, and they give you reasons to actually revisit previous areas. Maybe near the beginning of the game you saw a locked door and you were never actually able to do anything with it. Well, a couple hours later you come back with a key card and all of a sudden you're going in there and getting a new weapon. Those kinds of things actually encourage you to remember where you've been and what you've seen, and kind of keep a vigilant eye out, which I thought was really cool, especially, like I said, for when this was made. What's truly impressive to me about the game, other than just its graphics and a couple of these gameplay mechanics, is what they were able to do with what they had to work with. You know, they did a really good job of capturing the kind of tension that someone would get out of a game of hide and seek, which was one of the things that Hideo Kojima was going for with the game. And it makes you actually ask questions as a player. Is it worth trying to move from a hiding spot at a given time? Will a guard just happen to look over at you? What's the risk reward of trying to enter a room and take a gamble if you have the right keycard or not? These are really fun ideas to present to players that they did a really good job expanding on going forward, and it all really started here. While there is still a story to Metal Gear, it's pretty simple, and it's one that's made a lot deeper and more complex through the existence of games like MGS5, which actually takes place before this game. Fans of the Metal Gear franchise, though, they might be a little disappointed if you're jumping back to this game at how little character development and dialogue there is for Snake or anyone else. I think the Metal Gear series has become much more focused on narrative and world building over the years, and people really know it for that, which that's not something that was exactly massive in games in the 1980s, except maybe text-based games and a couple of blossoming RPG series that were starting to come about. It wasn't something that was in every game. Not every game was going to tell a story or try and find a big narrative. And Metal Gear has a little bit of one, but it's pretty simple and condensed. There's a real focus on gameplay in this game. That's not a bad thing at all, but it is different than the rest of the series, even the sequel to this game, Metal Gear 2, and that's why I bring it up as a point in the review. Overall, I really enjoy this game a lot. I actually think it has a very timeless feeling to it, and I do think it holds up today. I'm sure there are people out there, like I said, who can figure out this whole thing blindfolded. Maybe they never had to look up anything even when they were younger. They can run circles around me in the game. That's not lost on me. I'm not trying to pretend I'm the MLG Metal Gear gamer. It's not that I think it's impossible to progress. It's just that I think that some of the vagueness in this game regarding how to do so gets a little frustrating. Like I said before though, I truly do believe that this game holds up as a classic, but I also think it requires more patience than most games of today do for modern gamers. I actually have been playing through Metal Gear 1 over on my Let's Play channel, Degenerate Plays, and the game has certainly tested some of my patience there. That channel will be linked in the description in case you're maybe interested in watching my wife Jill and I play through the game and struggle through Outer Heaven, because it is fun, but it's a bit of a challenge. I go back and forth while playing the game, trying to decide how much I actually like it, but in hindsight of beating it, I really do think this game holds up and I enjoy it. Games like Metal Gear are really hard to evaluate or review because I'm trying to judge it by a mixture of really two standards. How impressive and innovative was this when it came out, and how does it hold up now? I think those are both fair questions. From the standpoint of innovation, Metal Gear is absolutely amazing. At the time, I'm sure this was incredible for, new players and people who hadn't experienced stealth games or games of this depth, and it would blow them absolutely out of the water. Today, though, I still think it's really fun and holds up well, but you're gonna have to be patient with it. The game does not hold your hand at all, and there are times where I certainly think it's better to just kind of save, shut it off, walk away and take a break. It was really rewarding for me to beat and be able to see the origins of this series. I think personally this is my least favorite Metal Gear game that I've played, but it's kind of like pizza. I really enjoy pretty much all of the Metal Gear games in different ways. Just because you order me a pizza that maybe isn't my first topping choice doesn't mean I'm not gonna scarf that thing down and love it, you know? It's more just I might have picked something else above it. I might enjoy something else more, but I still think it's really good. If you did enjoy today's video, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe. It helps my channel out a lot. As a variety channel, it's really hard to grow and get people to be able to see my videos at all at this point, so your support helps me out a ton. Speaking of support, I did want to say a huge thank you to some of my patrons and channel members. So thank you all so much for your help. It truly does mean the world to me. It helps me keep this channel going, experiment with new things, try stuff out that maybe I wouldn't have the money or time for. You guys are really helping me out, and it means the world to me. I look forward to reading your comments down below about Metal Gear, what you think about this game. You can always let me know if there's another game you think that I should review. I hope you have a fantastic day, and as always everyone, stay shway.